Okay, I am working on a motor from a mid-teens Victrola 11. A typical two-spring, separate spring barrels. This is not the improved motor that comes along in mid-1917. This is the let's see, when did they start? 14 to, I think it was mid-14 to mid-17. It's an improvement over the very early motors, and it's easy enough to work with. It's a good motor if you're just starting out, rebuilding these. This is a good motor to start with because it's a lot easier with the two separate spring barrels, get your springs in there, than the one single barrel, which takes a little bit more skill. But anyway, I am overhauling or cleaning this motor for another collector. And I just want to take a preliminary look at what we have here. Obviously, it's a nice oak machine, too. No major surprises. The usual amount of packed-on grease you would expect to see from a motor of this age that really hasn't been done probably ever. It's just been maintained. New grease has been thrown on there, new oil, but it hasn't actually been removed and cleaned. I've seen no sign of that anyway. The friction leather is pliable, and it looks brand new, actually, although it's not, but it does. The usual greasy collection of parts here. Let me put a glove on before I touch any of that, because this is black graphite grease, and it gets everywhere. I mean, it's messy to work with, and you can see how much of it is caked on there. It's going to take some scrubbing. But we have all the major parts here. Those are your spring barrels. This is a type of spring that has a pear-shaped hole on either end. Clips in, and always when you work with these motors, this type of spring, always make sure you take careful note of the direction of rotation inside the drum. You can put these in backwards, and if you do that, you're taking it all apart again. All that new grease is going to get everywhere. So always make sure, take a picture. Even though I've done this 1,000 times, I still take a reference picture and I refer to it just to be 100% sure before I close up the spring barrels or add grease and close the spring barrels up. Anyway, no surprises. This one has the gear attached to it. Yeah, we got a nice scoopy mess right there. That's going to be fun. Let's see. There's all your major parts. The shafts, the governor springs look excellent. Everything looks nice. It's just covered with old goopy grease. That's what you expect to see. What I like to see when I work on one of these motors. That means, for the most part, nobody's been playing with it, probably not for at least 100 years. So I shouldn't find any unpleasant surprises, half-assed fixes, or anything like that in there. Let's take a look at the springs. Now, this is the type that has 17-foot springs in them. They are original as far as I can tell. They are original Victor parts. Let's put it that way. It doesn't, you just got to see if I can show you. It's hard to see, but you can kind of make it out there, right there in the clear spot. You see it? Victor Talking Machine Company. That's pre-1929 Victor markings for RCA Victor became a reality. Both springs look to be about, the same amount of springiness, if that's even a word. But they both fought about the same amount to get them out. They weren't easy. They came out, but they fought a little bit. And they'll fight a little bit to go back in. So that's what you want to have. You don't want something like this. These are the reject pile. These are all kind of, well, some of these are broken, but kind of limp, and they don't do much. They're shot. They're totally gone. These are still usable. I mean, if I was going to keep this machine, I would probably put new ones in there and save these for another project, because that's just what I like to do. But this is for somebody else, so I'm not going to go spending somebody else's money unnecessarily. And there's no surprises. What you want to do with these is check the end. Make sure it's not cracked anywhere. If it's going to crack, chances are it's probably going to do it here first, although it can crack anywhere. And after this is cleaned off, if I find a crack, well, then we're replacing the springs. But I don't see any cracks anywhere yet. And usually the grease doesn't hide that very well. So we're good there. And the ends are good on both of them, so these can both be reused. You want to check the middle. You see that arbor shaft there? The spring is clamped around that. There's a little pin. It's clamped in there good. You want to make sure that is holding well. And these are. because sometimes these springs will get weak in this location and they will no longer tightly grip the arbor shaft, and they will come unpinned when you wind the machine all the way down, and now you just click, 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 nothing's happening. They don't reattach themselves. You have to take it apart and try to squeeze them, and that never works. It just means the tension's gone out of the center of the spring. It's time for new springs. New springs are available. They're about, I think, $45 each, 35 to 45, somewhere in there. I think they're 45 for these ones. These are the bigger ones. So now you would notice the difference in the spring if these were new springs. They would be sprung out quite a bit more. But because these are 100 years old, they don't have their full power anymore. I would say they're about 60%, which is good enough to play a few sides of a record, you know, something like that. Perfectly good for a collector machine that's not really played a lot, but played now and then. I play my machines a lot, so I like to have a full power spring. And I'm also lazy. I don't want to get up and crank it all the time. You know, if I can get 4.5 plays or 5 plays out of a one windup, hey, that's great. But, you know, that's just me. But everything looks okay here. And you want to make sure your springs are the same size. They do look to be the same size. Sometimes in the past, say 1938, the spring broke. There's no money. So they took it to somebody, the blacksmith, to fix it. And what he did was he cut the spring off where the crack was or whatever, drilled another hole, and simply made it shorter. What that means now is the power of the motor is only, of the springs, are only going to be as much as the shortest of the two springs. So you'll be wasting your power in the longest spring because it's only going to wind to this length and not that length. So you want to make sure they're the same. And they look to be the same. There's no really excessive, horrible wear on there. The grease is dry and, well, it's not dry. Definitely not dry. It is thickened. Let's put it that way. It's thickened. So what's going to happen, and what was happening with this motor, is that it was kind of gluing itself together in the barrel when it was, and when it unwinds, it springs out, it kind of sticks, and then boom, it lets go all of a sudden. That's where that thump and bump comes from that you hear on older, well, not older, they're all old, on Victrolas that haven't been serviced in a very long time. The spring is just, the grease has turned thick and gelatinous. It's not nice and smooth anymore. Well, we're going to fix that. I'm going to clean this off, scrub them real good, and they're going to get brand new high pressure moly grease in there, or whatever it is that I have. I'll take a look at what I have that I'm going to be using on this. I'm not that picky about the grease as long as it's good and it's modern. You want to start a food fight on most internet message boards, insist that one or another type of grease is the right type. It's not. Another set of springs over there from another project. We're going to use this. I think I got this at Tractor Supply. It's actually for not really intended for my Victrolas. I bought this for vehicles, but you can see how that grease gets everywhere. This will be premium heavy-duty grease. This is perfectly good. You know, I use stuff like this on equipment, that heavy equipment that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and on vehicles that can be worth anywhere from $2,000 to $80,000. It's not going to hurt a Victrola motor, especially considering that everything in that spring barrel, everything, is steel. It is not brass. Certain types of lubricants can harm brass, cause it to crack, deteriorate. Not thick brass, thin brass, mostly. That's where you're going to notice it. You know, you don't want to use it on something that's thin, like, say, your needle tin in a Victrola. That's made from nickel-plated brass or gold-plated brass, and it's thin brass. If you polish that with the wrong stuff, you can cause it to crack. But not on a Victrola motor. There's only one brass gear in this whole motor, just one. It's the one that goes right in there that your governor rides on. And you're not going to hurt that. You're not going to hurt that with this grease. You're going to be fine. And same thing with oil. One thing you always want to keep around is a good can of penetrating oil. I like Croil. It's expensive, but it gets the job done really well. You want something like this when you have to get that brass gear to slide up a shaft that's sticky with old grease, and you don't want to have to force anything. You spray Croil on there, you let it sit a little bit, and it'll eventually you can work it out off the shaft just fine. You're gonna want to watch out for your ball bearing that's inside this cup right here. Where is it? Let's find it. I just put it in here a minute ago. Leaves already, boy. So, oh, there it is. See that ball bearing right there? That's the ball bearing that goes at the bottom of that shaft, your main shaft, your spindle shaft right there. In this little pill jar, I have the two bearing caps from the governor. You hear them? There's some, what did I put in it this time? I think Coleman fuel in there. It's fine. Any solvent will do. Just to loosen up the tiny ball bearings that are inside those caps. Sometimes it can take quite a while to get that done. They get really glued in there with old lubricant. And I can agitate them this way. They bang it. Oh, I already hear it coming apart, actually. This one's not going to be that bad. I already hear a little sound in there that tells me there's at least one ball bearing loose. But that'll be sitting till this afternoon when I get around to it. Really easy way to get those clean. Pretty much the only way I know how. You're not picking them out of there. You're not. There's no pick that's going to get in there. It's really going to get those. You have to put them in solvent, let them sit, let the old stuff dissolve that's in there, agitate them to get the job done. That'll knock the ball bearings right out of there. And you have to get that done. You cannot leave those ball bearings stuck in those caps, because what's going to happen is the part of the ball bearing that's facing the shaft is going to flatten. Now you don't have a bearing anymore. It's going to affect your speed. It may affect your speed control. And when you have these out, those bearing caps, fit them onto the governor shaft ends. And just make sure they're not excessively worn. If they are, they're going to have to be replaced. Because if they're excessively worn, there's going to be problems there with your speed too. So chances are that I very rarely find that on these machines. So that'll be okay. And keep track of these. These are your felt washers that go between this frame, cast iron frame, and that motor board underneath. They're spacers. They need to be there. If these are not there, your crank is not going to properly fit where it belongs and engage with the motor, and you're going to have issues with vibrations and other things. You can always get felt and make your own if you don't have it. It doesn't have to be this thin. You can get a thicker felt and it'll squeeze down. Don't worry about that. I do it all the time. But these are in good shape, so we're going to reuse those. Make sure you put these back. Too many times I have found motors without those because somebody did not realize their importance. This motor had all the lock nuts on. That's 2 nuts for each one of these screws that hold the motor and the motor board together. The second nut is to lock down the first one. This is before the age of lock washers. So you needed to have that. A lot of times they're missing. And not this time, though. They were loose. They were loose. They were not missing. So that's good. And here's a few of the tools I use when I do this kind of work. You don't need anything really special. You need a selection of screwdrivers, regular screwdrivers. These are more fine tip to get the small screws on the shaft and on the brass gear. This is the Eiffel tool. It's great for gripping things. It's also contemporary to the machines. Various brushes. This brush is for cleaning that. You do not use a stainless steel brush on anything that has teeth. None of your gears or anything that's nickel plated. It's only for the heavy deposits that are on this frame. That's it. Don't use it anywhere else. This is a brass brush. This is for use on the steel gears gently. Don't get carried away, and don't use it on any of the fine gears. For fine gears and the brass gear, here you go. This is like a big old stiff bristle toothbrush. It's not, but it's plastic bristles. This will not hurt the brass. You got to keep a selection of brushes around. You can also use a copper brush if you don't get carried away. You know, and that's what you'd use on this. Copper brush is what you use on that gear right there. Always keep a little tap hammer around. This is going to be for smearing the grease into the spring barrel later. And I like to give it a squirt of engine oil stabilizer. In my case, I use Lucas or STP. Doesn't matter. Whatever you have. It's just to smooth out the grease a little bit. Make it a little bit more greasy, I guess you'd say. And it'll last a little longer. When I service one of my machines, I do it with the idea is I'm not going to open this motor again unless something breaks. I'm not opening this motor again for at least 25 to 30 years. I just did a video recently with the Victrola 50. That was, I think it was closer to 27 years on that one since I had serviced that motor the first time, and maybe closer to 30. Truly, I don't remember anymore. But it really wasn't horrible, but it did kind of need to be done by that point. You want some little punches. This is the 7/16 wrench for the lock nuts and the nuts on the screws. See, keep a bunch of screwdrivers around. I dropped one on the floor I got to find. Oh, it's nice when that happens. And I'll scrub this. Right now it's going into a big old bucket of old gasoline that I happen to have around. And it's going to sit there and just dissolve some of the grease while I go about my day. This afternoon I'll be back. I'll haul it all out. I'll clean it all off. I'll do the fine cleaning on it, and I'll let it sit and dry off before I reassemble everything. A word to the wise about using gasoline. Do not do what I do. Okay, I use gas. That's not necessarily the way you want to do it. Gasoline is extremely dangerous. The vapors are explosive and they travel. I do it in the middle of a field where there's no possibility of an ignition source anywhere. And I happen to have access to some old gasoline that I can use. Smells a little bit, but it's good for cleaning. It's the fastest way to strip grease off of these metal parts. But there's plenty of other alternatives. Kerosene, diesel fuel, simple green, soap and water, Coleman fuel. Well, that's a little dangerous too. You know, all that kind of stuff will take off grease. You know, even oven cleaner if you're really desperate. You know, that'll take a little longer, but it'll work also. So just because I do it doesn't mean that's how you have to do it. Just how I do it. And let's see. That's pretty much covers it all in this one. Like I said, there were no surprises. Everything looked good. And we're good to go. I'll be doing another one for this customer probably tomorrow. I don't think I'll get to it today, but probably tomorrow I'll be doing it. And that is an improved motor. So if you watch both videos, one after the other, you get to see what the improved motor looks like versus the older style motor from the teens. The improved motor was used at mid-1917. That's the motor with the single spring barrel with 2 springs in it, etc. That gets used up until the end of the Victor company's manufacture. So, and if you're from the UK and you're used to working with HMV, the improved motor will be what HMV called the number 32. Pretty much identical to its Victor cousin. And I'm not sure if the Germans used it or not at Victrola, but they may have. Okay.